You are listening to Steele's Eden, written by Caleb L.D. Appleby, narrated by Caleb L.D. Appleby. Part 1, Chapter 1. Eden, the City of Dreams. In the dimming light of an evening, the lights of the city buildings reached out across the water, shimmering off the surface in colours of blue, red, and gold. They were like fairy lights, dancing on the dusk air and stretching far along the shoreline in both directions. Indeed, it seemed every bit the city of dreams that reputation held it to be. From the prow of the ferry he gazed absently at the city as it slowly drew closer. The horn of a security ship bellowed across the calm waters of the channel between the island of Eden and the mainland, its blue and red lights flashing brightly as they flagged down another craft. A speedboat cut across the path of the ferry, skipping across the loose waves to the west, following the shoreline around to the north. Eden was closer now. He could see the ferry terminal along the glistening lights and looming towers of the city. Behind the tall buildings, which reached so high as to challenge the skies, he spied more lights among the hills where the trees were greyed in the dusk. That was the Golden Hills, situated inland from Central and West Side, and where many wealthy estates were built. The Golden Hills was one of the few places of Eden where trees still grew, and the only place where rivers ran to the sea. He glanced eastward, along the shore where the Eden Bridge joined the mainland to Central. It obscured the sight to the largest hill of the island, Mount Grand, but he could still see the tall peak and radio tower above the buildings. Letting out a deep breath, he rested his hands on the front railing of the ferry and looked back to the lights of Central. To the west, skies were dark, promising a black night, and the flicker of lightning through the darkness foretold of a coming storm, likely one of the first for the summer season. A plane whistled overhead, cutting low through the air towards Eden Airport, located along the western beaches of Central as it shuttled the wealthy to and from the mainland. The rumble of the aircraft's engine vibrated in his gut and reminded him how much he disliked flying. It was nearly as much as he disliked riding on boats. He would have driven across the Eden Bridge if he had had a vehicle, but the ferry would likely turn out better anyway. The bridge and Immigration Island, which sat at the halfway point between the mainland and Eden, would likely be busy, and he disliked crowds more than boats. A strange thought, really, considering Eden was one of the most densely populated cities. Not only did the buildings look like they were jostling for position, with their shoulders bumping into each other, but also at street level it was the same. The sidewalks were overcrowded and the roads were near constant gridlock. Housing apartments were built as tall as corporate towers, only more cramped. An immigration department was struggling to stop Eden becoming even more overpopulated. That was the way it was, though. It was a city of dreams, and everyone wanted their dream to come true. The wealthiest corporations in the country filled the towers of Central. Huge casinos lined the diamond road through Vale, between the Golden Hills and Mount Regan. The richest people in the world owned property on the islands of West Side. Some of the largest manufacturing corporations had their factories in there as well, and at the ports of East Point. Billions of dollars of goods were imported and exported every day. They made blockbuster movies in the studios of West Side that drew crowds of millions to the theatres, and in the same streets the stars walked like gods through some of the largest shopping complexes in the country. Eden was a place where you could be broke one day and a billionaire the next morning. It was a city where you might be trading stocks in excess of 100 million in the morning and struggling to find money for dinner that night. Eden was a place where dreams come true, and everything about it reinforced that ideal. From the buildings to the main roads, the city screamed wealth and importance. Cleverly designed lights ran up the biggest towers, displaying images and patterns. Blades of neon glows followed the underside of walkways and bridges of the highways. Holographic advertisements filled the streets displaying the ideal, and everywhere you looked there was someone flaunting their wealth and status. The nightclubs pumped music and alcohol through the city, and fancy restaurants sat on the beachside boardwalks, or in building terraces with hanging gardens. Tourists that came to Eden could soak in the views from the lookout atop Mount Regan, or wander through its wildlife reserve. They could visit the theatres in Central, go to the amusement park on Symphony Beach, or go on a cruise to Targo Atoll. The streets of Central were filled with shops for the tourists. Vale had all the casinos. and if they wanted to see how the rich and famous lived, those vacationing could take a bus to the west side in the Golden Hills. If they wanted to see the real culture of Eden, they could also venture into East Point and Baraka Town, the two oldest parts of the city. Neither had the glamour of the rest of the island, but that was where the real people lived. A tourist he was not, and he did not care about the allure of Eden. He had been born here, and he had grown up on the streets, so he knew the real face of the city. Beneath the glitz and glamour was a rotting core, infested with crime and criminal organizations that dealt with drugs and other illicit businesses. In truth, he hated this city, but he had nowhere else to go. The fairy horn called mournfully through the dusk, drawing him from his thoughts as it began its docking procedure. Clenching his jaw, he gathered his backpack before heading to the exit. The boat was filled with others who wore the same expression as himself. Either a family too poor to afford other means of transport, or folks who made the journey to and from the mainland enough times not to care. Others lurked in the shadows, trying to avoid the security cameras. Mostly they were young men about his own age, either trafficking something for a pittance or having come to the city with nothing but dreams of making it to the big time. Those trying to smuggle goods might have been forgiven for thinking the ferry terminal an easy access into the city if it were any other place than Eden. Being so close to the mainland, having sovereignty unto itself, the Eden government protected its borders with an iron fist. Thus the reason an entire island between the city and mainland had been turned into an immigration facility, and the only way into Eden by car was across the bridge and through that facility. On that island, every vehicle was thoroughly checked, and immigration papers had to be in order, and the ferry terminal and airport was no different, and held the same level of security. The ferry docked, and he moved with the crowd along the jetty into the large building, where they would all be processed and checked before being allowed admittance into Eden. The few he had noticed trying to avoid the cameras on the boats seemed even more uneasy, but he paid them little attention. The security guards were quick to notice them, though, and he spotted a few talking to their radios subtly, their eyes on the nervous ferry passengers. A slight smirk came to his face, and he shook his head. Most people were such idiots. Eden was filled with morons, and dangerous ones at that. Memories of his history in the city wafted back to him, most of them filled with sadness, rage, and frustration. Not for the first time since making his decision to return to Eden did he wonder why he was even coming back. The line in front of him moved, and he realized he had reached the front. Seconds later, one of the clerks at the many windows motioned for him from behind a protective screen, and he walked over. "Good evening, sir," the woman said, sounding overly cheerful and straining a smile. "How are you? Do you have your passport?" He did not reply, already handing the woman the small booklet through the gap at the bottom of the safety glass. The woman's question had been made out of no interest, an automatic greeting to try and appear welcoming. As soon as he handed her his passport, all smiles disappeared as she went through the same procedure she had done 1,000 times before. Her eyes seemed to glaze over as she scanned his passport and checked the right stamps had been used when he had boarded the ferry on the mainland. The stupor suddenly vanished from her expression, as something unusual appeared on a computer screen. A flicker of a frown came to her pretty face. The woman glanced at him before rechecking his passport. "There's a problem?" he asked, which sounded more like a statement. "I've had a haircut since that photo." A slight smile came to the woman's face as she turned her attention to him. Do you have any other forms of identification, sir?" she asked politely. "An Eden driver's license," he replied, reaching for his wallet. "It's out of date, though." "Thank you," she said as he handed the license and glanced to the nearby security guards, catching the man's eyes as if in warning. A slight frown came to his face as he watched the woman check his passport and license again. He had not expected trouble at immigration. After all, he was still a citizen of Eden, even though he had been gone for a decade. Although, now that he thought again of the circumstances of his departure with his mother and younger sister, he could guess as to what the issue might be. "There looks to be some misunderstanding with your passport, sir," the woman said seriously. "Would you kindly follow my associate to the waiting rooms whilst I sort this out?" 2 security guards came from the side, their faces grim, their hands near their weapons. With a slight nod to the woman, He turned to the security guard. "Sorry for the inconvenience," the woman said as the guards led him away from the check-in station to one of the security rooms. Opening the door, the guards motioned for him to go inside, closing the door behind him as he did. The sound of an electronic lock sounded faintly, and with another sigh, he walked over to the table and chairs in the middle of the room and sat down. Irritably, he took out his phone from his pocket and sent a message. "Delayed. Don't wait. I'll get a taxi." Seconds after he pressed the send button, a message appeared indicating that it had failed to be delivered. He was not surprised, though. It was apparent the waiting room was more like a holding and interrogation cell, which of course would restrict communications. Letting out a deep breath, he rested back in the seat and ran a hand over his face. If he was lucky, he would not need to wait long before talking to someone. 2 hours later, he was still waiting. He was also wondering, all the more, as to why he was being detained at all. He did have a criminal record in Eden, but that had all been rectified with him leaving 10 years ago. The more he thought about it, though, he could see that it was indeed the reason why he was being detained. So when the door to the room opened and a middle-aged man with greying hair and a wrinkled face entered, he was not surprised. "Detective Archibald Reeves," he said flatly, recognizing the man immediately, his tone clearly showing his annoyance. "Why am I here?" "I was about to ask you that," the man grunted, his frown heavy as he walked around to the other side of the table and did not sit down. "Why'd you come back, Reinhardt?" "That is a good question," he replied honestly, "but hardly one serious enough to put an alert on my passport and detain me here for hours, don't you think? Also, don't call me Reinhardt." "That's right. You prefer to go by your last name, Steele," Reeves scoffed, still unimpressed. His file held tight under his arm. "What about your mother and sister? Did you leave them behind in the mainland? You could have." "They're dead, Reeves," Steele cut in, crossing his arms. The detective seemed taken aback at that and sighed heavily, running a hand over his face and cursing quietly. "Sorry to hear that," the man said sincerely. "You could have gone anywhere, though. Why'd you come back to Eden?" Steele shrugged and looked away to the closed door. "Familiarity, I suppose," he replied after a brief thought. "I still have a friend in the city, believe it or not, so here's mildly better than anywhere else." "Templeton Knox," Reeves nodded seriously, grabbing Steele's attention. "I've been keeping an eye on him for the last 10 years. I can't say I'm too impressed. Despite the shared history you have with that man, he's gone down a shady path." "We keep in contact," Steele said flatly, pointing to his mobile phone on the table. Reeves nodded slightly and clenched his jaw, drawing on Steele's curiosity as he looked at the file the man was carrying again. Look, Steele," Reeves said finally, sitting down and seeming to struggle for words. "I have a proposition for you." "Spare me," Steele cut in before the detective could start. "Don't dismiss me so quickly. This offer might appeal to you." Reeves frowned, his customary expression. "You had applied to join the police academy and become an officer like your father before what happened?" "Let me guess," Steele sighed. "You want me to go undercover for you in some criminal organization? One that Knox is involved with, maybe? Or is it the company, perhaps? They're still running the underground, aren't they? You think that because of my history, I would be eager to do so. But I am not interested in becoming one of your moles. Past performance of the life expectancy of snitches in the company has not been very good." Reeves paused and scratched the stubble on his chin, eyeing Steele closely. "Fine," the detective finally said, and with a sigh, he stood back up, slipping the file under his arm before he turned for the exit. "You're free to go whenever you want, but stay out of trouble for your family's sake. Your father was like a brother to me, as well you know, and I hate to see his son die too." With that, the detective left the room, leaving the door open, and Steele sat quietly as he listened to the man's footsteps disappear down the hard floor corridors. "His wife and daughter already dead," Steele said quietly. "What does it matter if his son dies too?" Running his hand through his black hair, Steele got to his feet and collected his bag from the ground and his phone from the table before heading out of the room. One security guard remained and handed Steele his passport and license before he headed on his way. The passport had been stamped with the official seal, granting him full access into Eden and confirming his citizenship, which just meant he was not forced to leave the island after 6 months, like any tourist was. His citizenship also gave him the right to vote at elections and purchase property within the city for residential use, as well as work without hindrance at full pay. Not that he cared much about that. As soon as he left the room, his phone vibrated with the arrival of new messages, and his own text was sent. Several more messages followed the first, all from the same sender, Knox. Steele flicked through all the texts as he walked for the exit of the terminal, the last of which bringing a slight frown to his face. It read, "I'll be out front once you finish talking to Reeves." How'd he know? Steele mumbled to himself in surprise before slipping his phone into his pocket. After going through the security check station, where they used both X-ray and metal detection on his bag and person, he came to a luggage collection which was busy with people. The noise from the crowd filled the air, and holographic ads accosted him as he walked through the large area and out through the main doors into the car park and taxi rank. Compared to the harsh lights and white walls of inside the terminal, the entranceway was dark and filled with shadows. Street lights shone down from the sidewalks and car lots, flickering off the yellow taxis as they came and went. The car park was busy for the ferry terminal, with most people coming by bridge or by airport. Steele glanced away to the left as he walked across the other side of the taxi rank, to the high parking garage of the airport that rivaled the heights of some buildings, its walls painted brightly to try and mask its crude edges. "Reinhardt Steele, safe and sound," a man called from the shadows of a nearby pillar. Steele stopped and turned to the man as he stepped into the light, his white blonde hair as bright as a smile on his face. "Knox!" Steele found himself smiling as he looked to his old friend. "It's good to see you." "Right before my eyes, and I still can't believe it," Knox laughed, his blue eyes sparkling as he extended a hand to Steele. Steele accepted the handshake, and Knox was quick to wrap an arm around his shoulders. "Damn, it's good to see you," Knox exclaimed, stepping back from the embrace. "You too," Steele nodded, glancing at the many taxis waiting in the rank. "You should have left a few hours ago, Knox, instead of waiting for me." "Oh, of course I waited," Knox replied simply. "I thought you might run into some trouble with immigration and Reeves. That man has been keeping a close eye on me for over the last few years for some reason. Come on, my car's over here." Steele followed his friend along the taxi rank where a normal car sat parked among the yellow cabs. "Hey, is that your car, buddy?" a burly taxi driver exclaimed as they reached the doors of Knox's car. "You can't park here. You're clogging the rank." "So have me towed, big guy," Knox replied over his shoulder as he got into the driver's seat. The man cursed under his breath as Steele slipped into the passenger seat and tossed his bag into the back. "Oh, only one bag?" Knox remarked, seeming to only just notice the luggage. "You really were travelling light." "Got no money," Steele shrugged as Knox drove from the rank. "Enough for a few nights in a cheap hotel, but after that I'm pretty much broke. I don't suppose you know of any work going." "Hotel?" Knox exclaimed. "Think not of it, my friend. You will stay at my place, of course. On the couch, though. But don't fret, it's quite comfortable, if you can work around the springs." Thank you," Steele said after a pause. "Once I get some income, I'll find my own place." "Hey, stay as long as you like," Knox shrugged. "But what type of work will you be looking for?" "I might know something if you're not too delicate about what it entails." "Nothing to do with drugs, porn, or prostitution," Steele said firmly, looking to his friend, his grey eyes hard. "Oh, of course," Knox agreed, in a similar tone. "I might know of a few things." "What do you do these days?" Steele wondered curiously. "Hey, lots of things," Knox shrugged. "Now and then I've even been helping the company fence stolen artwork and jewellery. Not too much recently, though." "Artwork and jewellery?" Steele wondered curiously. "That's right," nodded Knox. "I learnt a bit about all that stuff from one of my mother's clients. He was not the usual deadbeat and actually treated her well before she died." "Why, she's dead?" Steele looked to his friend in surprise. "You didn't tell me." "Yeah, well," Knox replied hesitantly. "It was around the same time your sister overdosed, so I kept it quiet." Steele looked out the window of the car, half nodding, as the old wound was cut open once again. "You still should have said something, Knox," Steele said seriously. "How did it happen?" "Cancer," Knox replied. "Complete joke, right? After everything my father put her through, she goes and dies of cancer. But I guess that's just the messed up world we live in, isn't it?" "I suppose," Steele shrugged, his eyes still on the city as it swept by, the bright neon lights flashing in his eyes. But anyway, Bartholomew, that was the man's name, Knox continued. He helped me out after, taught me a few things. He died a few years ago, something about a deal gone wrong. Steele nodded slightly, and a silence filled the car. Knox did not have a radio on, so all that could be heard was the engine of the car and the tyres on the road. They had merged onto the highway, through Central, speeding towards East Point, and with the road raised above ground level, Steele had a far-reaching view across the buildings. He could see the Bank of Eden, its proud pinnacle reaching high over the other buildings, its side lit up by blades of red neon that came to a point at the very top. "Hey, you hungry?" Knox asked, breaking the silence and drawing Steele's gaze from the sights across Central. "I'm starving. Come on, my shout." Sure," Steele agreed. "Great," smiled Knox. "I know the perfect place in our old neighbourhood." Pushing his foot harder to the accelerator pedal, the car sped up and Knox moved through the traffic on the highway. Fortunately, it was not as congested as Steele remembered, and they were soon passing by Central University and Eden Stadium. "I don't recall many good places to eat in our old neighbourhood," Steele remarked thoughtfully. "Has much changed?" "Well," said Knox, a slight frown coming to his face, "there are plenty of new buildings, and the roads have improved. Public trams are quite reliable now. There's even one being built through Vale. But other than that, not a damn thing. The disparity between wealthy and poor has increased, and the unemployment rate has increased to records high. So aside from the new infrastructure, it's much the same as you left." "Does the company still run the underground?" Steele asked curiously. Knox nodded. "Of course," replied his friend. "Not even the government could weed them out. Although, in recent years, new players come to town. Some organisation calling themselves Sovereign." "I see. I don't know much about them, to be honest." Knox shook his head. "I don't have any dealings with them at all, but from what I hear, they have backing in all official departments." "Do you have much dealing with the company?" "Not really," replied Knox. "Not for at least a year now." "So where do you get your money?" Steele frowned at his friend. "I suppose you could say I have generous friends," Knox replied, avoiding the question. "What?" Steele wondered. "You're a gigolo?" No, nothing like that," Knox corrected swiftly. "The best way to make it anywhere in this town is to know the right people. So, naturally, I worked my way into the right circles and met a few older women who like their gardens and pools cleaned." "Right," Steele said slowly, understanding what his friend was insinuating. "It's not what you're thinking, Steele," Knox laughed awkwardly. "Hey, if you say so," Steele shrugged. "You won't hear me saying anything." "Yeah, I know," Knox said, a sincere smile coming to his face. They were driving into East Point now, and a flood of memories came back to Steele as he looked on the familiar buildings. There were plenty of new towers, but the old one still stood, dark in the growing night, but unmistakable. The Horseshoe Apartments brought back the most memories, such an iconic set of buildings, and now lit up like a Christmas tree in the night. "I hope this won't be takeaway food," Steele remarked as they drove through the streets, passing a myriad of advertisement signs in different colours. "Come now," Knox scoffed. "I think I know my best friend better than that. We'll be dining in Auntie Poe's kitchen this evening." "She's still going?" Steele asked with surprise, knowing the cheap restaurant well. "Her daughter's taken over now," Knox replied. "Nice girl." "You're dating her?" Steele asked, though it sounded more like a statement. "Occasionally," shrugged Knox, not embarrassed in the least. "When you're not with other girls," Steele smiled slightly, recalling how his friend was during high school. "Hey, she's also a friend," Knox objected, "and not just a fallback plan. Is the food still terrible?" "It's improved, in fact," laughed Knox. "Well, I guess it could only improve," smirked Steele, and Knox readily agreed. The streets continued to bring back memories for Steele as Knox turned from the main roads and along the back streets that were more crowded. The night markets were nearby and the sidewalks were busy with foot traffic, making it difficult to find a place to park. They found an empty lot eventually and pulled over. The restaurant was still a few blocks away, so they headed off along the street without paying for the parking meter. Steele was struck by the smells of the city and the bustling paths. The humidity was heavy in the air, carrying the scent of spices and food that made his mouth water. Away from the shoreline and amongst the tall buildings, there was no breeze, and the air was heavy and thick, like breathing syrup almost. The lights of the signs shone brightly in his grey eyes, and the busy streets reminded him to keep his hand close to his pocket that held his wallet. Noises of car horns and the murmurs of voices clouded his mind, and the blare of advertisements caught him by surprise. It was not that it was different from the city he'd spent the last 10 years in, but the onslaught of nostalgia and old memories filled his mind as he walked with Knox along the sidewalk. It came as a relief as they walked through the doors of Auntie Poe's kitchen, and Steele breathed easier with less people crowding him. Knox moved to chat with the girl working the desk as he found a table. Taking a seat, he drew a deep breath to steady himself. Despite the hate he still held towards Eden for things turning out the way they did, he could not deny that being back seemed right. It was almost like he had some unfinished business to attend, that he'd been putting off for years, and only finally deciding to face it now. It was a strange mixture of ease, anger, and determination that filled his heart. And even though he was still wondering if returning to Eden hadn't been the right decision, he was glad that he'd come back.